Right.
Hey Sebastian, how you doing?
Hey. So, in one of the bizarre things that's happened in the last, 2020 into 2021 is that you are now in the Latin Alternative Music Conference, and we have to explain how you got here.
Well, I'm only delighted by that. I mean, it goes to show that you should never think that the story has ended. And I'm very happy to be here talking with you about this piece of work we've done. Well, how does one explain? Should we? Should
Well, you know that you're partly responsible for the Latin Alternative Music Conference.
And how is that? How
Because the gentleman who started LAMC has told me that the reason he went into the music business was after he heard your first record.
Well, it's a funny thing to say because I've been involved with a lot of record labels over the years, but of course I did begin in independent. I was on an independent label to begin with. That first record was on an independent label. Uh, the label itself was founded with a £1,000 that was borrowed from the lead singer of a band, and run out of a one shop one shop front office. So I very much, and I used to go from my office job when I first recorded and try to feel as if I was involved in the record business by sitting there. And the very big thing in the late 70s was the picture sleeve, and that gave your record a little identity because you could put it in a rack like an album. But they didn't manufacture the records in that form, so somebody would have to take them out of the factory white sleeves and put them in. And that was my job. It wasn't a job I was doing for money. It was a job I did gladly because it made me feel as if I was in show business.
Right.
I really understand, from the ground up. I just wanted to be in it so much when I was 22 and, wanted to learn. I knew about music, but I didn't know about how the records got to people other than these mysterious large corporations that I couldn't even imagine, But when I saw how it was done, I understand from my younger friends who go via the various platforms now, they have the same perspective on the future ahead,
Right. So back to Spanish, where we actually met in Miami years ago, and somehow I would say about 2 years ago, you called me up with this idea, and I kind of stopped me dead in my tracks.
Well, let me wind back just a moment. I'm sure we can talk a little bit more about Miami because it's in your background and it's something I'm interested in. But let's start with this in terms of this particular record. The record we're speaking of is This Year's Model, my second album made in 1978. So,
and first with the Attractions, right?
However, yeah, the first with the Attractions. I think it was 4 years ago, I was approached to remix This Year's Girl from that album, which is a sort of the song which gives the album its title in a way, for the opening titles of the HBO series The Deuce,
right?
Which was at that point in its second season and therefore was exactly in the time period that the song was recorded. The request came from HBO that they wanted to, because of the topic of the show, which was about the sex industry and all of the cruelty and contradictions of that, they wanted to have a female voice in the second verse. And so I asked you if you would help me find the right voice to replace mine in English for the second verse. And we did a remix. So you did a remix, which I think the greatest surprise to me was that the original tapes not only were in good physical order, but when you went about mixing them again, the strength of the playing was so evident that even when you put a very different type of singer in, just for this one special remix, you had a totally different story.
Right.
I don't know, somewhere in that moment of excitement, I felt there was an opportunity to do this with every track on the record.
Right.
but
And
in Spanish.
yeah,
And that was when I remember you going, let me think about that for a moment, because I don't speak Spanish, therefore I can't write the translations myself. I can't adapt the lyrics, and I don't have that many friends. I have a few friends who are Spanish-speaking artists, but it's not like I know a lot of friends. If I were to gather a bunch of people to make a record in English, yes, I could find them, but I wanted that adventure. So that's where.
And what made you think of let me first hear these songs in a different language other than my native tongue? What made you have that idea?
I think having worked with you over a couple of records and having had the experience of, a couple of the first sessions that we did were for one was, I forget which came first. I was working on Wise Up Ghost with the Roots,
Right.
and I had a song which was an answer song to one of my own texts from 30 years earlier, which was a song called Shipbuilding, which was written during the Falklands-Malvinas conflict. And I tried to write the other side of the story. It was a songwriter journey that you sometimes go and you try and visit. You try to imagine something, somewhere else in the world than is your experience. And there were some lines that I wanted to be in Spanish, and you helped both with the translation with our friend Guadalupe Jolicoeur, who's also from Argentina, and Marisol from La Santa Cecilia was kind enough to sing that vocal. In return, you then asked me to sing in English on the next La Santa Cecilia record. So Marisol and I had a rapport. She came and sang with us. The first time I think she sang with us, I proposed that we do Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, the old Nina Simone Animal song. And I think, didn't you end up translating?
Yeah, she did it backstage.
So the germ of this idea of like getting past this, my inability to gather other languages and actually work with people begins, I suppose, with Marisol and yourself. And I just saw this potential, and I thought, if this track that we made 40 years ago sounds so vibrant when you push the faders up, what would happen if you introduced a different type of voice, not just not like some sort of record that was shining a light on me and was acting like some sort of tribute to myself, which would be ludicrous to conceive that. But what would happen if you went through the transformations? So you allowed all of these songs to be translated or adapted into Spanish. And then we started to talk about the cast of people. Certain names came to light right away, the people that and then you said, let me think about this song. And sometimes you would send me like records by an artist or videos, YouTube videos, so I could get a feeling for the sound of their voice. And I'd try imagine them taking on this melody. And sometimes it'd be quite a big distance between their own style of music and my song. But I could always, with listening, it educated me to all of the different types of singer. And I suppose there's also something else that I think is inherent here, is that I can sing rock and roll music, but I'm really a ballad singer in my head because it's lyric driven, right? A lot of it. And there's a lot of ballad singers in Latin music that whether or not they are singing at tempo, there's a lot of storytelling. There's a lot in that. So I felt as if if the right people translate the words, we could get something very interesting here, something that isn't just a gimmick. The last thing I wanted to do was, as they call it in movies, stunt cast this, just to get something eye-catching, right, or something which was some sort of commercial gimmick. You knew the people that you could ask who would take this on intelligently, with good heart, with humor, but also importantly, integrity, about how they would best be themselves inside this song, but also take on different things. There would be some challenges in doing this, you know.
Well, and I think it's important to mention that what we ended up doing was that the singer sang on top of the original recording.
Oh, That's it. But it's not like a remake or a tribute record in that sense. So it's nothing nostalgic about it. I just imagine that we were living in the Marvel universe, you know, where we just pressed the button and time stopped, and it was suddenly 40 years later, and those that nobody knew anything about the time in between, and you just heard that music for the first time. And I had to accept that, false modesty aside, I know I'm not terribly well known in a lot of the countries from which these singers come. There are people that know, have followed my work, but I've never had a hit record of the countries that are represented on Spanish Model. I've only played in Spain and Argentina.
Right.
Never, weirdly enough, even played in Mexico, which seems extraordinary to me, but it's never happened. So the fact that these songs would be as if they were brand new songs, and strangely enough, the recordings, the instrumental, take my voice out of it, take my personality other than as a writer out of it, I felt as if the performances of the Attractions, and of course I'm, as a guitar player, a member of that group, an honorary member of that group, they sounded pretty great. You know, I'm not going to be false to them. I was pretty impressed by the way we played. We cut that record in 11 days, 5 days or 6 days either side of our first trip to America. First, yeah.
What about I mean, because one of the things that, you know, that comes to mind in with something like this is you know, at this point, it's an iconic record. You know, it's 42 years ago it was made.
42 years. Yeah.
And you know, it's in the best of lists of a bunch of Rolling Stone magazine and a bunch of top albums of all time. What's the thought process about, you know, art as a living organism and grabbing something that people sort of see it as this is the way it's always been. It's been like this since its inception for 40 some odd years, and kind of blowing that idea up and recreating something.
The opposite of why you make a record that sounds like This Year's Model is to imagine it being put in a glass case and admired. It was definitely a young man's perspective. A lot of things I was discovering about myself and about, it was the first record, as you say, with the Attractions. I mean, all of these things, all of these accolades that anybody's handed over the years are kind of nothing to do with the feeling you had when you made it. Okay, right. It's very nice that some journalists get together and make up a list which reflects the sensitivities and the preferences of, you know, the list that they made 10 years ago would be completely different than the one that they make now, not necessarily because it contains lots of records made in the last 10 years, but what they're focusing on and elevating and diminishing has changed. Right. The audience's response to a record, whenever they happen to hear it, is completely their own and has nothing to do with those criteria, unless you're the sort of person who only buys a record if it says award-winning, right. You know, it came on the Rolling Stone list. Yeah, this band that plays on this record is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But we weren't thinking in those terms when we made that. We had no conception. When I was told I was in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for the first time, I said, I don't want to be in that. I had to be talked into accepting membership of that, because I said, if they get me in a little glass case like in the Natural History Museum, I won't be able to breathe. Right. I don't see it that way. And in any case, that group broke up. The group that really broke up in 1986, 87 and never should have reformed. That as you know, I work with Pete and Steve, you know, since that time, and we did regather and play some shows and made a couple of decent records, but it was never a thing like it was when we made This Year's Model. It was never a thing again. It was always me making records with the Attractions members on it. I didn't invite and didn't want them having the same sense of making the records the way we did when we made this one. This one was made like from the discovery of being four guys who just met in the summer of 77 in answer to adverts, and somehow, very, very fortunately, finding this kind of vivid cohesion as a group of, as a rock and roll band. We didn't go to college together. We didn't go to school together. We didn't, we didn't play in the clubs alongside one another. We just started playing one day, and this is what happened.
And what was it? What was it like to hear as a writer and an artist, to hear these songs back in a different language, sung by women from that perspective, and obviously it sounds different because the way of mixing is different nowadays than it was back then. What was that? Was there a moment where you paused? Or, I mean, I know I tossed and turned at night. I would hear it and I'd love it, and then I'd be like, what am I doing?
I never felt what were we doing. I mean, I think for me, you have to assemble the pieces of the puzzle. My first impression when we got back to I wasn't in the room with you for any of the mixing.
Right.
It just was, I was out on the road initially when you were doing it. So I was hearing rough mixes and then completed mixes. So I didn't have the experience of pushing the faders up and seeing the band cohere around a different vocalist. My immediate impression, like, you have to go down the list of which things strike you first. If you sent me a version of one of these songs, it would be, okay, how is the Spanish appealing to my ear sonically in relation to the music, first of all? So I'm hearing it as melodic music, which is not, given that many of these songs have hardly any melody because they're chant-like. Things like Pump It Up doesn't have a tune. It doesn't have a tune you can whistle. It's like da 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 da, da. It's like red. So you want to hear how the Spanish is going to affect the rhythmic propulsion, how effective it's going to be to hear this to somebody who doesn't understand Spanish. Then I discovered a wonderful thing that, hey, guess what? A couple of these songs really have melodies.
Right.
But the way I sang them, here's something I will admit. The 5 days before we went to America for the first time at the end of 77, I was only just discovering how I thought to sing on those early records. By the time I came back, I had so much attitude about what I was doing that a couple of the songs recorded after my first trip to America do not appear to have melodies in my rendition, because my attitude for singing the English is so profound. And the example of this is Hand in Hand.
Right.
I've got so much attitude about what I'm singing, it obliterates the sense of a melodic line. Right. Now, when the song is resung in another language, a melody is suddenly revealed, and it's an appealing melody. So right there is some alchemy that comes out of this. The other bigger transformation is to do with what these songs were about originally in English, which is a young man's gaze, how it is distorted, how a young man's gaze towards a woman, towards glamour, towards fashion, towards the desire, towards sexual desire, is distorted by all these illusions that we create and disguises we take on. That's the kind of after the fact grand way of saying it, but in reality, it's a rock and roll record, and the words rock and roll should explain what's really going on. The songs are about desire and the guilt of desire and the trick and trap of desire, if you want to kind of summarize it. So inevitably, if you take a song like Lipstick Vogue, which is commenting on the process of transformation of fashion and glamour, or Chelsea, which is also about that, or most especially This Year's Girl, and then give it to a young woman to sing, whether it was in English or in Spanish, it's going to change it. It's going to change what is being said and the humor or commentary that you might read into it as a listener today. Now, I don't know what generation of listeners are going to be curious about this record. I'm sure some of my original audience will be puzzled as to why we're doing it at all. But look at the other possibility, that people who have literally only just heard my name but have no idea what I sound like could hear this song sung by some artist they really love and discover it to be a new thing.
Yeah. I mean, for me,
yeah, that's why we're doing it, so that it throws all of the cards up in the air, you know.
for me, the great thing about this was I don't believe it's been done before. I
Absolutely know it hasn't been done.
taken a record, an album, and said, "Let's take the singer off and let's change the language and
Thing that's
let's."
been holding it back all these years, my voice and my face. No, I mean, seriously though, I mean, it is obviously, when I was a kid, the Beatles were my favorite group in the early 60s. They did record German language, and I think maybe Spanish as well, or
I think they did Japanese.
Japanese as well. The simple songs were translated phonetically, and they learnt them obviously
Right.
phonetically and didn't really understand what they may have spoken a little German, but I doubt they could have written the lyrics of "I Want to Hold Your Hand" in German.
Right.
But those were sort of like commercial ploys because they were so famous by then. They felt that they could intrigue even more people in those countries by translating. But the length of time between the original recording of this record and doing this is so long
Right.
that it's long enough to have forgotten about this year's model. You know, if it hadn't any reputation, if it had never been placed in any, you know, list of famous records, if we'd never been, if I had disappeared in a mist sometime in the last 40 years, you could have still discovered this record and decided to do this as an exercise. But because I'm involved, I can actually have an opinion about this and say, I'm really for this idea. And what's most exciting about it has been the conversations that I've had with the artists in preparation. Like, they're wanting to know what certain turns of phrase that are very unique and quirkily both mine and in English, what they could conceivably mean when rendered in Spanish. How would we, you know, the level of integrity. A good example is Drexler, who's interpreted Night Rally, which is one of the songs that isn't about desire and sex and rock and roll. It's kind of it's about the threat of authoritarian, the appeal of fascism, really, as it was rising in
Britain, right?
77 when I wrote that song. And obviously, somebody who's lived in these last years will not just what's happening today, but what all of our shared histories acknowledge. You know, your family left Argentina for specific reasons. Other friends of mine left Argentina for each of the people from different countries, particularly in Latin America, have, you know, it's in living memory that there have been situations where you would recognize what this song is singing about. So the reason to sing it again is the same reason I wrote it in the first place. It was kind of a warning. If we all walk this way, we're going to end up there. You know, that's all it's saying. It's not that, you know, and Draxler took very great care to acknowledge and understand what I'd said and then write his new rendition.
Yeah.
And that's what I really appreciate, the level of integrity. Anybody that would think, oh, that's a bit of a gimmick, that's a funny thing to do. Well, then you have to listen to the care that he put into that adaptation, because it's not like feeding the lyrics into Google Translate and coming out with something that, you know, this is really taking care. And whether you see these lyrics as really great writing or they're just some pop tune verses, you still got to know what you're saying if you're going to sing from the heart, whatever the song is. You know?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we did, was that we adapted the lyrics. We didn't do them literal. We didn't do literal translations.
And therefore it gave the opportunity for me to make the occasional cameo in the mix, because certain phrases, there was no purpose to translating them, like "pump it up." That would remain in English,
right?
You know, because it's a rallying cry in that song, but everything else can be in Spanish. So I pop up now and again on a couple of the choruses, but otherwise the only time I'm heard is my guitar playing, which, you know, isn't the main feature of this record by any means, but it's still a component, and occasional background parts where I'm not singing any words. And I like that. I feel like Alfred Hitchcock walking through the back of the scene, that, you know, like the director, you know. Yeah. But also we had another wonderful thing that happened, is that not every singer would feel confident to take on the job of adapting. So then you have the opportunity to involve some people who are writers.
Yeah.
You know, we have Elston, Torres, and Vega
Right.
adapting for singers who didn't want to take on the task. So then you've got a perspective of a writer really looking at the lyric and trying to give it to somebody and knowing who they were writing for as well and adapting to their strengths. And that's another thing I think that people that take a glance at this and don't quite grasp, you know, because it is so unusual to say, you took a 40-year-old record, and then what did you do? You took the lead singer off it, and then what did you do? So it's a remix. Like, well, listen to most of the jazz dance mixes. They mostly strip most of the music off and create a new rhythm section. Well, this isn't that. The rhythm section is every note the Attractions played. There's nothing added.
Well, there's even places where in the original record they were fade outs, and we
you actually hear a little bit more than you did. What's the I love that when you listen to old records and you feel like it's going somewhere exciting and then it disappears. Well, now you hear the crazy things Pete Thomas played at the end of No Action.
Right.
Something that that we never managed to mix in the original rendition of Pump It Up is that Mick Jones from The Clash came in to play on two songs. One of them is Big Tears, which was the B-side of Pump It Up, and it was a single back way when. And Mick was originally supposed to be on Pump It Up, but we could never mix him into the track with my voice.
Right.
Oddly enough, our new Spanish rendition, he features in the mix.
Yeah.
And the great thing for me is I always loved that Mick played on our record, you know, because we were sort of contemporaries, The Clash and the Attractions and myself, but we didn't really play the same kind of music, but he played really, really well on it, but it just didn't suit our point of view at the time. And now with a different singer in place, you can hear Mick and I trading rhythm guitars. He's not soloing, he's playing rhythm. And there's two rhythm guitars at the end, and you allowed the mix to go on, and you could really hear us locking in after a while in a dialogue, which I love. It's like a little glimpse of music that's pretty much been covered up all this time, you know.
I think we're coming to the end, but I just want to say that it's so exciting to be part of something that is really sort of pushing the envelope and making, you know, I think people are going to really enjoy this record, but most of all, I think that the biggest takeaway from me is that art, at the end of the day, whether it's music or whatever medium it is a living, breathing organism.
Well, that is everything that we're doing. This is now, like, you know, we are now 4 albums, I think, into a collaboration, you and I. And the fact is that you and I have, I feel, become such dear friends and such valued friends, and that you have such a good rapport with Pete and Steve, who are 2 of the original players. You can ask their opinion about this if you wanted to, and they're thrilled to hear themselves. I have no idea what the bass player will think about it, but you know, I don't suppose he'll turn the royalties down when they come in, if they do. But you know, he plays great. Give him credit. Bruce Thomas plays fantastically well on this record, and we all did our best job. Nick Lowe's original production, Roger Bashurin's original engineering allowed you to push those faders up and get excited again, creating a picture which we can recognize now with these fabulous new performances. It's not instead of the original This Year's Model, it's as well. It's for an audience that maybe don't know these songs. When they see the list of artists, they're going to be very surprised. I feel as if I have, you know, potentially 15 new friends, many of whom I've sat with now, had conversations on the phone with, sat down and talked with. I've really been absolutely so thrilled and very, you know, it's humbling in a way to find that somebody heard some song, it may not even be a well-known song, and knew your name from very far away, just as that I have records from all around the world that excite me. Even if I don't really know what's being said, there's something about them as a human making them that matters. And you go back in time and you listen to old records that thrill you. they set the scene for a new record now, and this is a new record now. That's what I think. It's a new record now. It's not an argument with the other record, because I love this year's model. I'm very proud of it. And it's amazing to me that even the original record still is of interest to anybody, or that I like it still. But to hear this and to hear how much life these artists have put into it and how much life you've brought into all of this is amazing.
And really, and the last thing I would say is, I really don't think there would be a band today that could play the way that you guys played that record. I mean, it's such a unique way of approaching music, and that, to me, you know, when I heard the tracks, I was like, I don't think I'll ever meet musicians who play like this, other than these musicians at that time.
Maybe because, as I said, you know, taking my face and voice out of the picture allows you to appreciate how exactly great the Attractions were at that moment. And a lot of other groups got more headlines because they did showier things. But I always knew that we could outplay everybody, all of our contemporaries. I always knew that. Not me personally. I was the amateur in the band. So that maybe gave it that little raw thing, because I was by far the least accomplished instrumentalist in the band. But I always knew that what Pete and Bruce and Steve could do was much more robust than people who made maybe a little bit more show of the danger in the rock and roll of what they were doing, when really, when you listen to it, a lot of the playing was pretty flimsy, you know. So I'm glad that you get to hear how robust that is and how exciting that is today, you know, because I'm not in any way nostalgic in inclination. That's why I really love the fact that we're making something that's for 2021, 22, you know.
Well, thanks for taking the time.
It's great.
I look forward to ever be at the Latin Alternative Music Conference.
I know, that's fantastic. What a great thing! What a great thing. Well, I wish everybody well, everybody's safe, and look forward to hearing. You know, the thing is now it's broadened my listening of all these artists. I want to hear what they do next.
Yeah,
I want to hear, you know, how this like little excursion they've gone on, they've given us the trust, fits into the story they're telling and everything they're doing. That's great. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll speak soon.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank you.
Bye now.